The corridor was quiet, too quiet. Only the low hum of the space station's life support system filled the air. Flickering lights lined the ceiling, each one buzzing softly. Daniel, a young human engineer, walked slowly along the metal floor, his boots making soft echoes. It was late. Most crew members were asleep, and he was returning to his small quarters after a long shift. He carried a small tool bag in one hand, yawning. The day had been normal repairs, system checks, nothing unusual, but tonight, something felt different. The air was colder than usual, and the shadows along the walls seemed deeper. Daniel glanced around, but saw no one. The corridor stretched ahead like a long tunnel, the end swallowed in darkness. He shook his head, telling himself it was just his tired mind playing tricks. He took another step when suddenly a cold hand grabbed his arm. Daniel gasped, almost dropping his bag. Before he could turn, he was yanked sideways into the shadows. His back hit the wall, and a slender figure pressed close to him. A finger long and delicate touched his lips. "Don't make a sound," a soft voice whispered. Daniel's heart raced, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. It was a girl, no, not human. Her skin had a faint silver glow, as if moonlight lived beneath it. Her hair fell in loose waves, shimmering faintly like strands of starlight, but her wide eyes, they were filled with fear. Before Daniel could speak, heavy metallic footsteps echoed from down the corridor. They were slow, deliberate, the sound of something or someone searching. The girl pressed herself closer to the wall, pulling Daniel. With her deeper into the shadowed corner, her breathing was fast and shallow. Daniel's own heartbeat pounded in his ears. Who was she? Why was she hiding? The footsteps grew louder. Daniel could hear a strange clicking noise between each step. It didn't sound like a normal crew member, more like claws tapping against metal. The girl's hand tightened on his sleeve, silently begging him to stay still. A tall shape passed at the far end of the corridor. It was hard to see clearly in the flickering light, but Daniel caught a glimpse: long limbs, hunched posture, something sharp glinting in its hands. It stopped, turning its head slowly. Daniel held his breath. The thing's eyes glowed faint, red as it scanned the hallway. After a long moment, it moved on, disappearing into the darkness. Only then did the girl release her hold slightly. She leaned close, her lips near his ear. "They are hunting. If they hear us, we're dead," she whispered. Her voice trembled but carried urgency. Daniel wanted to ask who was hunting and why. But before he could, she tugged his arm. She pointed toward a narrow service hatch at the wall's edge, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Without waiting, she slipped inside, her small frame moving quickly. Daniel hesitated. This was insane. He didn't even know her, but the sound of faint claws on metal returned. Closer this time, he followed, pulling the hatch shut behind him. Inside, it was pitch dark, the air warm and stale. Daniel could feel the cramped metal walls of a maintenance duct. They crawled forward on hands and knees. The girl moved silently, her steps careful not to make the slightest sound. Daniel tried to do the same, but the tools in his bag rattled softly. The girl froze, her hand shooting back to touch his arm. They waited, listening. Somewhere behind them, the metallic footsteps stopped. A faint scraping sound began, like claws dragging slowly along the outside of the duct. Daniel's skin prickled. The girl leaned toward him, whispering her name for the first time, Lyra. "I'm Lyra." Her voice was barely more than a breath. Then she added, "If you want to live, stay quiet and follow me." The scraping faded, and they moved again. After what felt like forever, they reached a small vent opening. Lyra peered through carefully before sliding it open. She slipped out into another corridor, this one darker, older, the walls lined with pipes and cables. Daniel climbed out after her, his knees aching from crawling. He was about to ask for answers when Lyra suddenly turned. Pressing him against the wall again, her silver eyes widened, and she mouthed a single word without sound. Run. From the far end of the corridor, a shape emerged from the shadows. Not walking this time, crawling, its limbs bending at strange angles. Its glowing red eyes locked on them. The clicking sound began again. Faster, sharper. Daniel didn't know what this thing was, but he knew one thing: he and Lyra had just become prey. The thing's eyes glowed like tiny red embers in the dark. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. Beside him, Lyra's hand gripped his wrist so tightly it almost hurt. Her silver skin seemed to pale even more in the dim light. Neither of them moved. The creature's head tilted slowly. Unnaturally, as if listening, Daniel's mind raced. Should he run? Should he fight? Lyra's earlier warning echoed in his head. If they hear us, we're dead. The clicking sound filled the corridor again. Echoing against the metal walls, it stepped forward, slow but deliberate. Daniel could see now its legs were jointed like an insect's, but its body was partly covered in dark, cool metallic armor. Long, blade-like claws scraped the floor. Leaving shallow cuts in the metal, it sniffed the air with a sharp, twitching movement. As though scenting them, Lyra didn't look at him, but her grip on his wrist tightened again. Then, without a sound, she pulled him toward a half-open panel. In the wall, Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second before ducking inside. The space beyond was narrow, filled with humming pipes and faint blue light from coolant lines. They moved as silently as they could, Daniel's boots whispering against the grating floor. The clicking grew louder behind them. Daniel glanced back and saw the creature crouching low, its claws clenching and unclenching. It was following. Lyra turned sharply, spotting an open grate. Above them, she pointed and began climbing the small access ladder fixed to the wall. Daniel followed, his heart hammering, the bag of tools on his back feeling heavier with every step. They reached the vent and crawled inside. The air was warm and filled with the smell of metal and oil. Daniel tried not to think about the noise his own breathing was making. Every small sound seemed dangerous here. As they moved, Daniel whispered, "What is that thing?" Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her silver eyes glinting in the dim light. She shook her head. "Not here." She mouthed silently. Her urgency told him enough. This wasn't the place for answers. From somewhere below, a new sound began. A deep, rumbling growl mixed with the clicking. It was joined by another, then another. Daniel's stomach turned cold. There wasn't just one of those things. The vent sloped downward into a wider maintenance tunnel. Lyra dropped down first, scanning the shadows. Daniel landed behind her, his boots making a soft thud. Almost instantly, a distant metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. Both froze. The sound repeated, slow, deliberate, almost like footsteps. But it came from ahead. This time, they were trapped. The tunnel was narrow, with only one path forward, and the vent they came from behind. The noise ahead grew closer. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. Lyra stepped sideways, spotting a small round hatch low on the wall. It was barely large enough for one person to squeeze through. She gestured for Daniel to go first. He hesitated. "What about you?" Her eyes narrowed. "I'll follow," she whispered, finally speaking aloud for the first time since they'd entered the vent. Daniel didn't argue. He knelt and crawled through the opening, the cold metal pressing against his shoulders. As he squeezed inside, on the other side, he dropped into an even darker space. Low ceilings, dripping pipes, the floor slick beneath his boots. The faint hum of the station's machinery surrounded him. A moment later, Lyra slid through behind him, sealing the hatch. They stood still, listening. The sound of the creature's clicking footsteps moved past above them, fading slowly. Daniel exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. "What are those things?" he asked in a low voice. Lyra leaned against the wall. Catching her breath, "They are hunters," she said quietly. "They do not belong to this station. They were brought here by who?" Daniel pressed. Lyra's eyes darkened. "The ones who run the lab." Daniel's mind reeled. He had heard rumors about a restricted section of the station-sealed labs where experiments took place, but he had never seen proof. "And you?" "Uh-huh," he asked. "You escaped from there?" She nodded slowly, her voice almost breaking. "I was not the only one. But I am the only one left." Her words sent a chill through him. Before he could say more, a faint tapping sound echoed from the pipes above. Lyra's expression changed instantly, alert, tense. "That's not them," she whispered. "That's a signal." Daniel frowned. "From who?" Lyra didn't answer, but she moved quickly. Following the sound deeper into the low-ceilinged passage, the tapping repeated in a strange rhythm. Like a code, they turned a corner and entered a wider space where dim emergency lights flickered. In the center of the floor lay a broken maintenance bot, its casing dented. Next to it was a small device flashing red, then green, then red again. Daniel knelt, studying it. Before he could touch it, Lyra grabbed his wrist. Shaking her head sharply, "It's a tracker," she hissed. "They know we're here." Almost on cue, a loud metallic screech filled the air. From behind them, in the darkness, the clicking sound returned, this time faster, urgent. And from the tunnel ahead, a second set of clicks answered. They were trapped a gunoli. This time, the hunters weren't alone. The clicking from both directions grew sharper, faster. Daniel's chest tightened. There was no time to think. Lyra's silver eyes darted around the narrow space, searching for a way out. Her gaze landed on a circular hatch at the floor's edge, half hidden beneath loose cables. She dropped to her knees, yanking the wires aside. "Help me," she hissed. Daniel knelt beside her, his hands fumbling with the rusted latch. The hunter's sounds were closing in. Echoing off the metal walls, his palms were sweaty, his heart pounding so hard it felt like the sound alone would give them away. Finally, with a loud metallic snap, the hatch released. A cold draft of damp, stale air rose from the darkness below. Lyra didn't hesitate. She slid in feet first, disappearing into the shadows. Daniel slung his tool bag over his shoulder and followed. The ladder was slick, the rungs wet, and the air smelled of oil and old metal above them. The hunter's claws scraped against the hatch. One of them let out a low, guttural hiss that made Daniel's skin crawl. The hatch slammed shut above, and the darkness swallowed them completely. "Where are we?" Daniel whispered as his boots touched the ground. Lyra's faint glow was the only light, reflecting off the dripping pipes around them. "Lower decks," she said softly. "Maintenance tunnels. Not many come here anymore." Daniel glanced around the space, felt colder. Older, steam hissed from cracked vents, and distant machinery groaned like something alive. They moved quickly, their footsteps splashing in shallow puddles. Daniel's mind spun. He still didn't understand what was happening. Who were these hunters? Why was Lyra so important? And why was he risking his life for someone he'd just met? But every time he looked at her, the fear and determination in her eyes kept him moving forward. The tunnel split into two. Paths, one narrow, one wide. Lyra paused, listening. From the narrow path came faint vibrations. From the wide one came nothing. She pointed to the narrow one. "This way." Daniel frowned. "Why the noisy one?" "They don't go where the noise is," she explained. "Why not?" Her voice lowered. "Because the noise hides us from their hearing." They slipped into the narrow tunnel. The vibrations grew stronger, and soon Daniel could hear the source, a massive water pipe running along the wall, its constant rush masking their movements. The tunnel curved downward, and the light from Lyra's glow shimmered against the flowing water. Daniel almost felt safe until a sudden metallic clang echoed ahead. Lyra froze, her hand raised. They listened. Nothing followed, but as they rounded the bend, Daniel saw why she stopped. A section of the tunnel had collapsed, twisted metal and debris blocking the way. Worse, something lay half-buried in the ruby-eye's armor, blackened, its claw bent at an unnatural angle. It was one of the hunters, dead. Daniel's stomach tightened. If one of them had died here, what had killed it? Lyra's gaze was fixed not on the body, but on the wall beside it. A large gash had been torn into the metal, leading into a pitch-black chamber. "This is not part of the station," she whispered. Daniel stared at her. "Then what is it?" Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Old? Older than this place?" Before Daniel could respond, the sound of claws returned, this time from behind them. Lyra moved fast. Crawling through the jagged opening in the wall, Daniel followed, his bag catching on the metal before he yanked it free. Inside, the air was colder, the walls rough and uneven like stone instead of steel. It didn't feel like a space station anymore. It felt like a cave. The ground sloped downward, and faint blue crystals glowed along the walls. The light was dim, but enough to see that the space opened into a large cavern-like area. Strange symbols were carved into the stone, their edges worn with age. Lyra ran her fingers over them, her voice barely audible. "This place is not human?" Daniel was about to ask more when a shadow moved at the far end of the cavern. Two glowing red eyes appeared, but they were higher, wider apart than the hunters they'd seen before. This one was bigger. Lyra grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a pillar of crystal. The creature's heavy steps shook the ground slightly as it entered the cavern. It sniffed the air and let out a deep growl that vibrated in Daniel's chest. They stayed hidden until the massive figure moved toward the far wall, disappearing into a tunnel. Lyra exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. "We can't go back the way we came," she said. Daniel frowned. "Then where?" She pointed to a smaller side passage on the left, half hidden by crystal growths. "It leads to another cargo bay," she said. "If it's still there, we can reach the upper decks." They crept toward the passage, moving between the glowing crystal clusters. Daniel felt like they were being watched, every step making his nerves tighten. The narrow tunnel beyond was silent, except for their breathing. But just as they neared the end, a metallic clang echoed. From behind, the large creature had returned and, this time, it was coming their way. Lyra's eyes widened. "Run." The narrow tunnels seemed to stretch forever. Daniel and Lyra ran as fast as the cramped space allowed, their feet pounding against the uneven ground behind them. The heavy thud of the massive creature's steps echoed closer and closer. Its growl rolled through the stone walls, deep and hungry. Daniel's lungs burned, but stopping wasn't an option. The tunnel curved sharply, and a faint light appeared ahead. Lyra's voice was barely more than a whisper. "That's it." The bay. Daniel didn't question her. He pushed himself harder. They burst out into a huge open space. The ceiling so high, it disappeared into darkness. Metal crates and towering cargo containers stood in long rows, their surfaces covered with dust and strange markings. Daniel slowed, scanning the shadows. This didn't look like any cargo bay he had seen before. The air was cooler here, the silence heavy. A faint hum came from somewhere deep within the room, almost like a heartbeat. "What is this place?" Daniel asked under his breath. Lyra's silver eyes flicked to him. "Not a normal bay. It's storage for things too dangerous to move." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Dangerous? Like what?" Lyra pointed toward a large container on the far side, its sides glowing faint blue. "Those are living traps," she said quietly. "They feed on heat. They'll latch onto anything warm-blooded." Daniel swallowed hard, instinctively stepping back. "Then maybe we shouldn't be here," he muttered. Before Lyra could reply, the sound of metal groaning filled the air. The far wall's shadow shifted. No, it moved from between the containers. Multiple glowing red eyes appeared. Daniel counted at least 6 pairs, each one blinking slowly in the dark. The hunters had found them. "Stay quiet," Lyra whispered urgently. "They can't see well in the light, but they can hear every breath." Daniel's pulse raced. One of the creatures stepped forward, its insect-like claws clicking against the floor. Then, from the shadows, a voice called out Daniel's voice. "Lyra, over here." Daniel froze, his mouth dry. It was perfect, his exact tone. The same urgency, the same words. Lyra didn't move, her grip on his sleeve tightening. "It's not you," she whispered. They mimic voices to lure prey. A shiver ran down his spine. The fake voice called again, this time sounding even closer. Daniel clenched his jaw. He couldn't let his instincts betray him. They moved deeper between the crates, their steps slow and deliberate. The faint hum in the room grew louder, vibrating faintly in Daniel's chest. He glanced around and noticed a cluster of containers with faint warning symbols. The markings were alien, but one image was clear: a skull. Lyra caught his gaze and shook her head sharply, silently telling him to stay away. They rounded a corner and spotted a service ladder leading upward to a high observation deck. It was their only chance. Lyra motioned for him to go first. Daniel climbed quickly, the metal rungs creaking softly under his weight. Halfway up, one of the hunters screeched a sound like tearing metal shattering the silence. The others answered, their clicks turning into a rapid, frenzied rhythm. Daniel reached the top and turned to help Lyra up, but just as she was halfway, one of the hunters lunged from below, its claws slashing through the air. Daniel grabbed Lyra's arm and yanked her up just in time. The claws scraped the ladder, leaving deep grooves in the metal. They stumbled onto the observation deck, breathing hard. From here, they could see the entire bay shadows moving between the crates. Hunters stalking silently. Lyra leaned against the railing, her face pale. "They won't stop," she said softly. "They were made to follow until their prey is gone." Daniel's mind raced. The deck had another door on the far side, sealed with a heavy security lock. He dropped his tool bag, pulling out a small plasma cutter. "If this thing still works, we can get through," he said. Lyra nodded, keeping her eyes on the movement below. The cutter hissed as it burned into the lock, molten metal dripping to the floor. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang echoed from behind them. Daniel spun. 3 armed figures in black armor had entered the deck, their rifles aimed directly at Lyra. The leader's voice was cold. "Step away from the specimen." Daniel's stomach dropped. These weren't just security, they were part of the same people running the lab. "Specimen," Daniel said, anger in his voice. "She's a person." The leader's helmet visor glinted in the dim light. "She is property," he replied flatly. "You've interfered enough, human." One of the soldiers moved toward Lyra. She backed up against the railing, her expression hard. Daniel's mind spun. Eve, they took her now. She'd be gone forever. Without thinking, he grabbed the nearest crate and shoved it toward the soldiers. It slammed into them, knocking 2 off balance. "Run," he shouted to Lyra. She didn't hesitate. Darting toward the far hatch, Daniel followed, the soldiers recovering quickly. The plasma cutter finally burned through the last piece of the lock. The door slid open with a groan, revealing another narrow maintenance passage. They slipped inside just as gunfire tore through the air. The door slammed shut behind them. Daniel's breathing was ragged, but Lyra's hand found his in the dark. "You didn't let them take me," she whispered. "Not a chance," Daniel replied, tightening his grip, but the sound of claws on metal began again in the distance. The hunters had found the passage too, and now there was no turning back. The narrow passage stretched ahead like the throat of some metal beast. Every step Daniel and Lyra took seemed too loud. The echoes bounced off the walls, reminding them that silence was their only shield. Behind them, faint but steady, came the clicking of claws. The hunters weren't rushing. They didn't need two predators moved at their own pace. Lyra slowed and pressed her back to the wall. Her silver skin caught the dim emergency light leaking through cracks in the panels. They hunt by sound. She whispered, barely moving her lips. If they hear one wrong step, they'll be on us. Daniel nodded, his throat dry. He tightened the straps on his tool bag so nothing would jingle. Even the smallest clink could be the end. They continued forward, their boots brushing against the grated floor instead of lifting fully. It was like walking in a dream where every move felt heavy and slow. Daniel's ears strained, catching every creak of metal and every drip of water from a leaking pipe somewhere above. Something groaned old steel under pressure. The sound made him flinch. But Lyra didn't stop. She was listening for something else entirely. At a junction, the passage opened into a wider maintenance bay. Here, huge cargo lifts stood still, their chains swaying slightly as if something had passed recently. Dim red lights cast long shadows across the floor. Daniel felt exposed. In the open, there was nowhere to hide. He glanced at Lyra. She pointed to the far side of the room, where a ladder climbed toward a narrow catwalk that would lead them to the station's ventilation ducts, quiet places the hunters rarely entered. But between them and the ladder was a stretch of empty floor. The open space seemed to hum with danger. They'll hear us, Daniel mouthed. Lyra's reply was silent, her hand forming a shape like a wave, and pointing to a distant vent. A steady hiss of steam poured from it. Daniel understood immediately. The steam's roar could mask their footsteps, but they'd have to time it perfectly. The hiss came and burst 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off. They waited, their bodies tensed like coiled springs. When the next hiss began, they moved. Daniel's boots barely left the floor as he matched Lyra's pace. The steam was hot and damp, coating his face in moisture, but under its cover, their steps became ghosts. Halfway across, the hiss stopped. Daniel froze, his heart pounding. From somewhere in the shadows above, a claw scraped metal. Slowly, he looked up. 2 glowing red eyes peered down from the top of a container. The hunter crouched low, its head tilted as if trying to pinpoint them. The hiss burst again, louder this time. Lyra tugged his arm sharply. They ran the last stretch. The ladder just steps away. Lyra climbed first, moving quickly but carefully. Daniel followed, the rungs vibrating faintly under his grip. As they reached the catwalk, a loud screech split the air. The hunter had leaped from its perch, landing where they'd stood seconds ago. It tilted its head up, the red glow of its eyes locking on them. The clicking began again, faster now. It was no longer stalking, it was chasing. They sprinted along the catwalk, the metal vibrating under their weight. The narrow path twisted above the bay before leading into a dark tunnel. Daniel's boots skidded on the turn, but he caught himself on the railing. Behind them, the hunter scrambled onto the ladder, moving with terrifying speed. Lyra shoved open a hatch at the end of the catwalk. A rush of cold air hit them. Ventilation. They crawled inside, the space just big enough to move through on hands and knees. The metal walls vibrated faintly with the hum of massive fans somewhere. Deeper inside, Daniel pulled the hatch shut behind him. The hunter's claws clanged against the other side almost instantly. It couldn't fit inside, but its screech followed them through the vents. They crawled for what felt like forever. The fan's drone was constant. The air here smelled cleaner, colder. Daniel finally asked in a low voice, "Where are we going?" "To the docking ring," Lyra replied quietly. "There's a small shuttle there." If it's still working, the vent narrowed ahead, forcing them to squeeze through. Lyra went first, her movements quick and smooth. Daniel followed, his bags scraping against the walls. Every sound felt like an alarm from somewhere below. A faint series of metallic thuds echoed more hunters. They were tracking them through the station structure. Finally, the vent opened into a small observation platform overlooking the docking ring. Below, the curve of the ring was lit by pale blue lights. Rows of empty airlocks stretched along its length. At the far end, a small emergency shuttle sat docked, its hull scuffed and worn. Daniel's chest filled with hope. "That's it," he said under his breath. Lyra scanned the area, her gaze sharp. "It's too quiet," she murmured, as if to prove her point. A shadow moved near the shuttle. Not one hunter, three. They stood motionless, their heads turning in unison toward the observation platform. Daniel's blood ran cold. The hunters had been waiting. The observation platform felt cold and empty. Daniel and Lyra crouched behind a stack of crates. Their breaths were shallow, eyes fixed on the three hunters below, near the shuttle. The creatures stood like statues, waiting silently. But Daniel sensed something else, a new danger, rising fast from behind. A soft metallic click broke the silence. Daniel turned sharply, heart pounding. Three figures stepped out from the shadows of the docking ring's control room. They wore dark armor, sleek and shiny, with visors glowing faint blue. Each carried a rifle pointed directly at Lyra. "Step away from the subject," the leader commanded in a cold, hard voice. Daniel's blood froze. They weren't just station security. They were the lab's private guards, the people who had kept Lyra prisoner, who had sent the hunters after her. Lyra's eyes flashed with fear and anger. Daniel stood protectively in front of her, fists clenched. "She's not a subject," he said firmly. "She's a person, and you have no right." The leader's voice remained icy. "You interfere with government property at your own risk, human." One of the guards stepped forward, aiming his rifle directly at Lyra without hesitation. Daniel grabbed a nearby metal crate and threw it hard. It crashed into the nearest guard, knocking him off balance. Chaos erupted. The guards fired their weapons, and Daniel ducked behind a pillar. Lyra sprinted toward a door at the far end of the deck. Daniel followed closely, dodging bursts of plasma fire that sizzled past his head. The door was locked tight, but Daniel's hands moved quickly. He pulled out his plasma cutter. Aiming carefully at the security panel, sparks flew as he melted through the lock. "Come on, Lyra," he shouted. She was already sliding the door open, disappearing inside. Daniel dove through just as the door slammed shut. Behind them, the guards banged on the metal surface, yelling orders. Lyra leaned against the wall, gasping. Daniel took a moment to catch his breath, then scanned the new room. It was a small maintenance corridor, dimly lit, with pipes running along the ceiling. "We need to move," Lyra said urgently. Daniel nodded, but his eyes were filled with doubt. They had escaped the hunters only to face armed soldiers. The station was no longer safe as they hurried down the narrow corridor. Daniel asked, "Why do they want you so badly?" Lyra's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Because I know their secrets about the experiments, about what they created." Daniel frowned. "Experiments?" She looked at him, eyes full of pain. "They used me and others to create those hunters' weapons designed to hunt and kill." Daniel shuddered. "That's why they want you back alive." Suddenly, the corridor ahead flooded with red emergency lights. An alarm blared through the station, loud and piercing. Daniel covered his ears. But Lyra didn't move. "We have minutes, maybe less," she said. "We need to reach the shuttle before the lockdown seals the docking ring." They ran again, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor. Around a corner, they encountered a sealed blast door. Daniel's plasma cutter buzzed as he cut through the thick metal. Behind them, the sounds of guards and hunters mixed in a terrifying chorus. The station was closing in on them as the door hissed open. They burst into the docking ring. The emergency shuttle waited, its hatch open like an escape promise, but the hunters were already here, circling the shuttle. The largest of the creatures growled and lunged toward Lyra. Daniel grabbed a heavy pipe and swung. The creature dodged with unnatural speed, claws slashing inches from his face. Lyra fired. A stolen plasma pistol she had taken from a guard. The bolt hit one hunter square in the chest. It screeched and collapsed, but the others advanced faster. Daniel realized they were outnumbered and outmatched. They needed the shuttle's protection, and fast they sprinted to the shuttle, climbing inside just as the hunters reached the platform. Daniel slammed the hatch shut, sealing them inside. Lyra slammed her palm on the control panel, powering up the engines. Outside, the hunters slammed their claws against the hull, but the metal held strong. The shuttle's engines roared to life, shaking the whole docking ring. Daniel gripped the controls, guiding the ship toward the airlock. "Hold on," he said. Lyra looked at him with a mix of fear and hope. As the shuttle detached from the station, alarms blared behind them. The hunters howled in frustration, their red eyes burning through the viewport. Daniel exhaled, heart racing. Lyra squeezed his hand, whispering, "You didn't let them take me." Daniel smiled faintly. Not a chance. The stars stretched before them, cold and endless. But for the first time in days, Daniel felt free. The shuttle shuddered as it left the docking ring's safety. Outside the viewport, stars stretched cold and endless. Daniel's hands gripped the controls tight, sweat slicking his palms. Lyra sat beside him, still catching her breath, her silver skin glowing softly in the dim cockpit light. But freedom was not yet theirs. An alarm blared sharply, intruder alert. Daniel glanced at the display. A small, dark shape was moving fast toward them. "Hunters," Lyra said, eyes wide. With alarm, Daniel swore under his breath, "How did they find us out here?" The dark shape grew closer, faster. It wasn't one of the hunters from the station. This one was bigger, more dangerous. Its claws scraped the shuttle's hull. Trying to latch on, the shuttle jolted as the creature's weight pressed against it. Daniel fought to keep control, but the ship shook violently, alarms screaming around him. Lyra grabbed a plasma cutter from the side panel and aimed it at the viewport. She fired bolt after bolt, each hitting the creature's glowing eyes. The creature screamed, a sound like grinding metal and broken glass. But it clung on, refusing to let go. Daniel made a split-second decision. "Hold tight," he said. He pushed the throttle forward, the engines roaring. The shuttle surged through space. Jerking and twisting, the creature's grip faltered for a moment. Lyra fired again, striking the creature's claw. It howled and finally lost its hold, spinning. Away into the void, the cockpit was silent except for their heavy breathing. Daniel wiped his brow. That was too close. Lyra nodded. "We are not safe yet." She turned to him, eyes fierce. "There is one more place we must go," Daniel frowned. "Where?" She took a deep breath. "The command station, if we can reach it. I can expose the truth about the hunters and the lab. Only then will this nightmare end." Daniel hesitated. Going there meant risking everything. But looking at Lyra's determined face, he knew there was no other choice. He set the course for the command station, a remote outpost several light minutes away, as the shuttle sped through the stars. Memories flooded Daniel's mind the moment Lyra had grabbed him in the shadows. The hunts, the betrayals, the desperate fight to survive. He realized how much he cared for her, not just as a person to save, but as someone who had changed his life. Suddenly, the shuttle jolted violently. Warning lights flashing, another attack. Daniel shouted. The shields flickered as a bright beam struck their hull. The hunters, or someone worse, had followed them. Lyra grabbed a gun from the console, firing back into the darkness outside. The shuttle shuddered again, systems failing. One by one, Daniel struggled to keep control as the ship spun wildly. "We won't make it," he said, panic rising. Lyra's voice was steady. "We have to try." She reached out and took his hand. Together. Daniel squeezed her hand back, feeling strength flow from her. The shuttle hurtled toward the command station. The outpost's defenses lit up. The darkness ahead, warning sirens blared as they approached. Daniel fought the controls, dodging enemy fire. With one final burst, they broke through the outer shields. They landed roughly on the landing pad, sparks flying. The hatch opened, and soldiers rushed in, weapons raised. But before they could react, Lyra stepped forward, raising her hands. "I am not your enemy," she said loudly. "I bring proof of your crimes." Daniel pulled out a small data chip from his bag. Lyra handed it to the station commander, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes. The commander scanned the data, her face hardening. "This is evidence of illegal experiments," she said slowly. Daniel and Lyra watched as the commander activated a secure channel. Soon, reinforcements arrived, securing the station. The hunters outside the station were destroyed in a fierce battle. Lyra's name was cleared, and the lab's operators were arrested. Daniel and Lyra stood side by side, watching the sunrise. Over the planet below, Lyra smiled softly. "Thank you for everything," Daniel smiled back. "We survived because we trusted each other." For the first time in a long time, hope filled the air. They were free, together, and ready for whatever the stars might bring next.